On This Week in Enterprise Tech, I go gaga over Google's new fiber, Curtis goes all Gandalf on patent trolls, and Cheebert gets kinda Hadoopy. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiat. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 36, recorded April 8th, 2013. This will not stand. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Directory Wizards. If you have a need for directory synchronization, Directory Wizards has the solution. UnitySync. Offer a truly unified global address list, create a messaging forest, link seamlessly with HR databases, or build a backup force to aid in disaster recovery. Visit dearwiz.com/enterprise for an extended evaluation that you can download, configure, and put into action today. And by Interop Las Vegas, the largest independent technology conference and expo for IT professionals. If you're in IT, you can't miss this year's event. Visit www.interop.com to register and use code WELV for $200 off a conference pass or a free expo pass. And by Rackspace, the open cloud company. At Rackspace, build what you want, where you want, and how you want it, all backed by their world-renowned fanatical support. Try it today. Download the open cloud at rackspace.com/open. Welcome to Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Balacer. I'm the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. And I'm joined by my all-star panel, starting with Mr. Brian Chi, the evangelist for Thinlinks. Brian, you're not in Hawaii right now. What is this white monolithic background that we see behind you? And you're muted.
I'm in Brisbane, California at the InteropNet warehouse, and sorry about that. I'm on a headset today. So anyway, we build the world's largest temporary network in a warehouse in Brisbane. Get it all ready, actually use the fiber that we're going to connect everything up with, and then pack it all up and ship it off to the show venue. Now, I'm going to show one little thing just for grins and giggles real quick. So people were interested in how things have changed in Hawaii. That's 1905, and that's just recently. Hawaii has changed just a little bit. Anyway, life is fun, and I'm looking forward to Padre joining me in Brisbane very soon.
That's right. I'll be joining you in just a moment to build the world's most advanced temporary network. But before we do that, I want to introduce my other co-host, Mr. Curtis Franklin from Enterprise Efficiency. Curtis, Cox is absolutely beating you up. How are you? What are you doing today?
Well, we've got billions and billions of students here in the state for spring break. It is warm. It is blue skies. It's Florida the way that the tourism board would like it to be all the time. So on the East Coast, it's a great day.
And that's Curtis Franklin channeling Carl Sagan. Let's get straight into the news. We've got actually a significant story here. Now, we talked about Google Fiber before. It was deployed in Kansas City and then in Olathe, Kansas. And, well, it seems like it's now going to Austin. Now, this is all unconfirmed. There's supposed to be an announcement this week. But people are pretty much expecting it to roll out the same way it did in the previous two cities. That means $120 a month for 1 gigabit synchronous up and down bandwidth plus HDTV, $70 a month just for the gigabit bandwidth, or $300 one time in order to get 7 years of 5.1. That would be the standard broadband service from Google. We talked about Google Fiber being deployed in Olathe 2 weeks ago, and, well, this is what we said.
And what they're figuring out is that if it's going to have a real impact on all of the services they offer, then it's going to have to be because it's a Google business. I think that if anything, they underestimated the entrenched lethargy and inertia of the incumbent telcos and the incumbent cable systems. Those companies have what they think that their customers are willing to pay for at prices that the market is more or less willing to bear. And it's going to take far more than a single proof of concept in the middle of Kansas, or to be honest, on the edge of Kansas, to make them change the way they do business. So if Google wants to see a lot of people streaming lots of data out there, they're going to have to be the ones providing the pipes.
What do you think about this, Oliver? Because it seems as if Google is linking this off of one of their big data centers near Kansas City. That's why they're able to provide such quick rollout. That's why they're able to provide such high bandwidth at low prices. Do you think in order for this to become an actual disruptive move by Google, it needs to roll out into a bigger city or into a city where there are far more competitors from telcos, from Time Warner, from Comcast, from AT&T?
Bottom line, do not care. Yes, if they have to move away from the middle of nowhere, I mean, if they deploy in Kansas or Juneau, Alaska, or whatever, no way are the telcos even going to care, right? If they go into New York, I used to deal with telcos in New York, and if you call Microsoft the evil empire, you can call Verizon in that particular city the absolutely most evil, despicable empire that there is. They own New York, okay? If Google makes an inroad there and actually gets customers there, I'll be impressed, and then then it's a disruptive technology because Verizon will have to react, right? But these middle of nowhere hook up to my cheap data center moves, it doesn't matter.
Right. Mitch, let me take this. So we, at the time, said there were pretty much 4 things that had to happen in order for Google to prove that Google Fiber was real. 1, they needed to release to a larger city than either Kansas City or, and thank you very much for the pronunciation, Olathe. They needed to release to a city outside of Kansas. They needed to release to a major metropolitan area, and they needed to prove that their pricing structure was actually doable, that they could get by with what they were charging per month. If the Austin rollout happens the way we think it's going to happen, they've satisfied all 4 of those criteria. Chibert, let me throw it to you. If this happens, does Google now prove that, yeah, fiber is real? It's not a disruptive technology that we're just poking out to make fun of the telcos, but that they're actually going to do this to more and more cities?
Oh, yeah. The nice thing about Google Fiber is that it has the potential for really changing things in that city. Just look at what's happening with Kansas now. I've got a friend that lives in Austin, and his comment was he will freaking believe it when he sees it. But if it does happen, he is all over getting it. There actually is a lot of tech in Austin, and I think they're going to find some very willing customers, considering Cox is there too.
All right. Let me go over to you, Curtis, because there has been a lot of that sentiment of I will believe it when it comes to my door. I will believe it when it actually happens. I will believe it when I can use it. It seems as if Google's getting better at this. I mean, it took them a while to roll out Kansas City. It took them less time to roll out Olathe. And now, just 2 weeks later, they're announcing a major metropolitan area, a place that actually has a history of using a lot of bandwidth. So what does this mean for, let's say, the enterprise manager who's looking at the viability of a Google solution?
Well, I think it means that they are treating the business side of this and the infrastructure side of this much more seriously. To me, the intriguing thing is that this starts to open up the possibility of looking at where you locate branch offices, where you locate employees who might want to telecommute. But from the enterprise side, as I said, there's a seriousness that's indicated here. And I think that if they can go ahead and deliver on the promise of fiber to Austin, then they really will have put themselves into the next tier of serious enterprise providers.
All right. Now, there is another angle to this story, and that is I have Jesuits who live in Kansas City, and they have told me that they may not run servers of their own. They may not really stretch that 1 gigabit pipe, but what they have noticed is that their service is far more consistent. They have far fewer dropouts. They have far fewer times in which the internet is just unavailable. Now, Cheebert, consistency, that sort of SLA, the service level agreement that people can have with Google to have that consistent on connection, to know it's not going to go down every 3 minutes, that changes what you can do with the connection, does it not?
Oh, you bet. One of the things that I'm looking at wanting to do in my home is I've got an enterprise grade firewall. I've got it connected back to my lab all the time. Now, if I had something where I could trust it and not have to worry about things dropping out all the time, I may actually start considering backhauling audio and video into my lab infrastructure or vice versa. When you have bandwidth that's reliable, bandwidth that's always there, bandwidth that's ubiquitous, suddenly you can do a lot more things with video. You can do a lot more things with control systems. You can do a lot more things with voice over IP. There's all kinds of things that can happen. But if you don't trust your connection, you start looking for other things.
Right, right. Curtis, I want to throw back to you and actually end this with you, and that is from the enterprise side, from an enterprise manager. Most IT people are willing to put up with slightly slower connections if they can get a service level agreement, if they can get a guaranteed level of service so they know they're always connected. What happens if Google wanders into Austin, and where you've got a lot of startups, and suddenly they have the ability to get an inexpensive sub $100 a month connection that is faster and more reliable than, let's say, the $1,500 or $3,200 line that they might lease from the telco?
Well, I think, among other things, it's a game changer for the telcos and cable television providers. From the enterprise side, what it means is that all of a sudden you've got these leased line arrangements that you have to take a new look at. You may still choose to go with something where you can. You mentioned the 3 magic letters, SLA, service level agreement. If you can get a dedicated service level agreement that guarantees a certain amount of uptime or guarantees a response in the case of an outage, then that's worth a lot of speed. If Google goes into these areas, though, and provides not only residential service, but something like at least a small business caliber service where they do provide a guarantee about the response to any outage, then I think this becomes a true game changer and something that many, especially small to mid-sized companies, are going to take into account when they're looking at places to expand their operations or even places to relocate.
I just received a note from our super TD Jason Howell that it's now official. We've got breaking news. The Verge has broken that Google Fiber is officially coming to Austin, Texas. Now, this is not it. This is not over. I'm sure we're going to see more rollouts in the future. But when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the technologies, about the services that make this all possible, and maybe delve a bit more into Google accidentally turning this into a moneymaker. But before we get there, I want to talk about our first sponsor. Now, here on Twiat, we get a lot of questions. We get questions from users who just want to know how their network works, and from IT managers who want to know how they can solve some of the most demanding projects that they encounter on the network, on the enterprise network. Now, the number one thing that we hear is, well, how do I sync my data? How do I back up my tables? How do I make sure that server A is the same as server B? How do I make sure that I can survive a disaster? I can back up my email directory, back up my user directory. Well, in the past, there have been solutions that kind of work, but the problem has always been that they're complicated or kludgy, or they're workarounds that may not be replicatable on an enterprise level. That's why I'm happy that we have had Directory Wizards come on as a sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech. They offer Unity Sync, which provides synchronization solutions, offering countless customizable options to conquer the challenges of your environment. They offer a truly unified GAL, that's a global address list that lets you create a messaging forest, link seamlessly with HR databases, or build a backup forest to aid in disaster recovery. Unity Sync also supports multiple directory types, including Active Directory, Open LDAP, Oracle, Novell, Lotus Notes, Domino, GroupWise, multiple SQL and ODBC databases, and text formats. Unity Sync can scale from small directories with hundreds of objects to enterprise directories consisting of hundreds of thousands of objects without requiring extensive training or installation and configuration in time. In fact, your fully functional evaluation copy can be up and running today. What I like is that there are no per-user costs or limits. Pricing is per installation, per number of directories being synchronized. Upgrades and live technical support for a full year is included in your purchase and renewable with a yearly maintenance contract. Now, the web-based user interface is something else. It's intuitive and friendly. There's no scripting or programming required. You don't have to kludge or make up your solution as you go. It just works. One great feature is that no additional database is required. Unity Sync is entirely self-contained, synchronizing data from one directory to another without the need to create a third. And finally, full or partial directory synchronization is available, affecting all available or just a few attributes. Whatever your needs, Unity Sync can be configured to suit them. Here's what we want you to do. We want you to visit dirwiz.com, that's dirwiz.com/enterprise today for an extended evaluation that you can download, configure, and put into action now. That's Directory Wizard, dirwiz.com/enterprise, and we thank Directory Wizard for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, let's get on to a little segment that we like to call Stuff My IT Guy Says. Chibert and Curtis, we are getting crazy excited about Google Fiber rolling out to Austin, but there's a little bit of understanding that we can lend to the discussion on the technologies behind that. A question has been brought up, well, how does Google afford being able to roll out this high-speed internet to so many people at a price that's lower than the telcos? And I think for us to answer that, we need to answer a little question about what is peering. Now, Chibert, can you really quickly tell us what is peering? When we hear peering between telcos, between network providers, what are we talking about?
You're talking about where is your connection. So, for instance, when the University of Hawaii peers with the commercial world, we peer for the internet too for academic institutions, but we also have peering with the commercial world. So when you peer, you say, okay, at this level, this is where I go from, say, the .edu world to the .gov or .edu to the .com. It's where the boundary of your world, so in my case, it's hawaii.edu. When we change over from the hawaii.edu world to, say, the thinlinks.com or twit.tv, the relationships and the rules on how you transition from one world to the other, that's done in what's called a boundary gateway protocol. It's a set of rules and tables saying if I'm going from here to here, this is where I make the transition, or this is where I do a cross connect. So when peering goes bad, though, it can go really bad. Like, for instance, I had to transfer grab a file from Spirent Corporation for some gear I was working on. And even though Spirent was literally 1.5 miles away from my lab, the peering had gone bad between their world and my world, and I actually didn't cross-connect until Chicago. So I had to go all the way to Chicago, cross-connect to the .com world, come all the way back only to grab a file from a server that was sitting 1.5 miles away from me. Lots of fun.
Right. We talked about BGP in our discussion on routing. It was a Routing 101 Stuff My IT Guy Says a few episodes ago. So if you want to hear the full discussion, you can go back. But when we're talking about peering, we're really talking about 3 different types of relationships between networks. Now, we all know that the internet is actually a collection of networks that uses TCP/IP and BGP in order to interconnect themselves with one another. Well, in order for them to do that, they need to make one of 3 arrangements. The first is transit. Transit just basically means you buy access onto another network. You have to pay them for all the traffic that you put onto their network. The second one is peering. Now, this is what we see in top tiers, where they make an agreement for their mutual benefit to allow traffic to flow freely across networks. Often what will happen is they'll just sort of add up the traffic, and at the end of the month, it's typically a zero sum. I've sent as much traffic as I've received from my network partners. The third type of arrangement that could be made is the customer. It's sort of it's a sell. It's to say, okay, well, I'm going to give you access to my network to connect you to the internet, and I'm going to charge you a certain amount of money. I mean, when you think about it, it's really kind of logical. But without those agreements, we could not have these interconnected networks. Now, here's the question. Here's where it comes handy when we're talking about Google, and that is, we don't really know what kind of relationship they have with the major telcos. We know that Google has maybe the most fiber in the ground right now. I know they were number 2 a while back. They may have actually eclipsed that. If they have the most fiber in the ground, that means that any traffic that they transfer over their network is free to them. But anytime they have to go over a competitor's network, they have to make one of those 3 arrangements. Curtis, you have your ear to the ground when we're talking about peering arrangements. Is there any info, any rumor that you've heard about how Google is actually connecting customers to the internet? Because at some point, they have to have these handoff points.
You know, I haven't heard about their relationships. I've got some speculation. You know, Google was one of the companies that was going around a while back buying up dark fiber. That's all of the fiber that's been laid that no one has lit up to this point. So I suspect what they've got are some rather complex transit arrangements going on back upstream to one of the tier 1 providers. But that's all speculation. And much like the petroleum pipeline arrangements, I suspect that if you tried to pick this apart, what you would find is an incredibly complex set of transactions that involve every single packet going to and from Austin. I would love to see it at some point, but don't really expect to anytime soon.
Cheever, let me ask a stupid question here, and that is, why is it so secretive? We can never find out what peering arrangements network providers have with one another. Why do they have to keep it under such tight wraps? Actually,
Transit agreements and things like that are kind of like what the pricing the Walmart pays Gillette for razors. If the Walmart competitors knew what Walmart pays Gillette, they're going to try and demand the same pricing. This happens all the time in the wholesale world. Depending on how much you buy and what you buy, how you buy, that actually determines the bottom line on what you pay. And typically, the wholesale of anything is private. You don't make that public. So it's all about volume. And if you have enough volume, you can drive the price down. But sometimes the agreement can be so that you go and say, hey, I'm going to commit to buying a certain amount of X, and you're going to give me pricing as if I was buying X right now, and I just have to make sure I actually do buy X within period Y. And so what you start getting is, you make promises that you're going to, by getting this kind of pricing, that you're going to be able to greater volume and thusly fulfill your agreement.
There has been a suggestion that this 3 levels of agreements, the 3 different ways that networks can relate to one another, may be outdated in an age where peering arrangements are not always honored. And what I mean is, there are now networks, there are ISPs that have vested interests in providing faster connectivity to certain services than others. For example, Comcast and NBC. Comcast could give you faster access to NBC content. Google could give you faster access to Google Search, to Google services, and to YouTube. Curtis, let me throw this back at you. This is sort of, it's rolled into the net neutrality debate. But when we talk about peering and we talk about networks paying other networks or making agreements with other networks to provide free flow of traffic, how much does that, well, let's just say the opportunity to provide faster access to your services come into the game? Or you're muted.
Thank you. The opportunity is certainly there, but what we see is this is the point at which those SLAs come into importance. because the companies that have these higher level agreements are going to have agreements that say, you carry my data, you transmit my data, it transits your network without consideration for what type it is. Now, the place that it gets interesting and what we've seen is a company saying, well, we're not going to bias our network traffic based upon who's providing it, but in order to provide good service, we're going to do some necessary traffic shaping to provide good overall service to everyone. And if that traffic shaping just happens to whack the traffic from our competitors, well, doggone it, that's just unfortunate. I suspect we're going to see a lot more of these subtle cases before we get into the big, blatant company by company biases. One way or the other, though, we're going to have to depend on these SLAs between the major companies to try and keep the bits flowing in an unimpeded fashion.
Right, right. Now, one last bit of peering is anytime you talk about peering, you also have to talk about tiering. So we have the different types of peering arrangements that you can make. Tiering is, well, it basically describes what kind of provider you are. Tier 1 means that you've made enough agreements and you have enough of a network yourself to be able to have free-flowing traffic to every other network that's connected to the internet. It basically means you're a big player. And you don't have to pay either to transmit your traffic or collect money in order to receive traffic from another network. It's just that you're big enough to be a backbone. Tier 2 goes one step down, which means that you still peer with a lot of networks, but you possibly pay for transit to, say, reach customers on the Comcast network or on the Cox network. Tier 3 is a network that does not peer. It's a private network that then pays for access to all the other networks on the internet. I've heard differing stories from people who describe Google as either a tier 1 or a tier 3 network. Cheever, what do you think they are? I mean, they have a big network, but at the same time, most of that network bandwidth is dedicated to letting data centers talk back to one another, not to transmitting customer requests.
Oh, no, you know, it's hard to say, especially since Google is so secretive about its agreements. I just threw into the chat room that I think Google's a tier 0. They're the God network. Everybody wants to connect to Google. Everybody, you know, who knows? Maybe if Google's building such a darn big network, maybe they really will be a tier 0 as the ultimate content provider that everybody needs to connect to. Who knows? It's
Right.
very secretive.
What about it, Curtis? Are we adding another tier here? Are we going to have the super tier, which is Google and Google alone, the company that has so many of the services that other companies want that they'll pay Google to have access to their network?
I think that this is probably going a step too far because, well, to be brutally honest, I don't know that Google really wants to be in that backbone business. You start getting into some political areas, and as part of the critical national infrastructure that Google has shown that they don't really want to be involved in. I think what they're going to be is a very important customer for a lot of other service providers, probably sufficiently important to be able to shape policy as easily as these network providers shape traffic.
Fantastic. Now, that's not going to be the end of the peering discussion. We actually will have to bring it up much more often, especially once we start getting into the cloud. Well, we're going to have to know where our providers are in this tiering and peering arrangement in order to know what kind of service we're going to be getting. But for now, that's the end of Stuff My IT Guy Says. Coming right up is my favorite segment of Twiat, where we get to do the Troll Smackdown. We're going to be talking some patent. But you know what? Before that, I want to take a break to recognize our second sponsor. Cheebert and Curtis and I are all part of the Interop family. Now in its 28th year, Interop Las Vegas is the largest independent conference and expo for IT professionals. This year, the agenda, the speakers, the size of the exhibition, and the trending enterprise IT topics that it will cover all point to one unavoidable conclusion. If you're in IT, you cannot miss this year's event. Now, here are 6 important reasons why you need to make plans to be at Interop Las Vegas. First, Interop is vendor neutral. As a big tent IT show, Interop stands alone as the only vendor neutral event where you can easily compare solutions across a variety of approaches and gain important insight and education on trending topics. Second, Interop offers a breadth of content. Interop offers deep content in over 125 conference sessions and workshops on topics like IT management, big data, cloud computing, bring your own device, enterprise mobility, advanced and software-defined networking, virtualization, and information security. Third, Interop gives you hands-on access to 300-plus solutions providers. Those same technology categories will be well represented on the expo floor, where over 300 companies will exhibit their wares. Catch up with your existing IT suppliers, plus explore innovative, new alternatives that take different approaches to old problems. Next, Interop lets you see interoperability in action. One of the highlights of Interop is the Interop Net, a real-world network on the newest gear and solutions supporting the latest standards, all interoperating with each other. Tour the Interop Net Network Solutions Center, led by engineers who run it, and for some fresh ideas of your own, talk to them and find out how they build the most advanced temporary network in the world. Interop also offers training specifically for Apple in the enterprise. That's right, this is new. New for Interop is that they have partnered with Future Media Concepts to offer a training curriculum that focuses on OS X and iOS in the enterprise. The Mac and iOS IT conference classes taught by world-class Apple-certified instructors will offer training on managing, supporting, and integrating Macs, iPads, and iPhones into your business environments. Finally, Interop offers the Information Week CIO Summit. For the first time at Interop, Information Week will produce the Information Week CIO Summit. The summit is a great opportunity for CIOs and IT executives to learn how to drive, fund, measure, and profit from a culture of innovation from those who have done it themselves. This year, the summit will feature technology executives, including Bill Schloe, the CIO of the San Francisco Giants, Lyndon Tennyson, the CIO and Senior Vice President of Union Pacific, Michael Capone, Suren Gupta, Frederick Holston, all leaders in the IT industry. Now, here's what I want you to do. In fact, here's what Curtis, Chibert, and I want you to do. We want you to visit interop.com to register, and you can use the code WELV for $200 off of a conference pass or for a free expo pass. So go to www.interop.com now and use the offer code WELV. We thank Interop for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, let's get back to the business. We're talking the patent troll Smackdown. It's got to be my favorite part of Twiat because, well, you know, we're just talking about companies that are being shamed for what they're doing. We've got a study from the Boston University researchers, Professor Michael J. Marr and lecturer James Bresson, who have estimated that it costs us $29 billion, that's in 2011 dollars, to defend against patent trolls. Their work has been used by the FTC, by the European Parliament, the U.S. Supreme Court, the Federal Circuit Courts, and by the Federal Trade Commission. So we know they know what they're talking about. Now, the amazing thing is that the $29 billion estimate in 2011 is up from $7 billion in 2005. So we've seen this huge explosion of costs to defend yourself against NPEs. That's non-practicing entities, or another name is patent trolls. These companies that have collected IP that don't make anything of their own and then use that IP to sue other companies. Now, what I really like is that the study also shows that they've only measured the direct cost of litigating, so what they have to pay their lawyers. If you were to include opportunity costs, the diversion of resources, the delays in new products, and market share, the cost of NPEs jumps up to about $80 billion per year. Chibert, let me throw this to you. I know that this just makes you shake your head, and this is why last week we were so excited to hear about Google entering into an open source protection agreement. But now that we can actually put a dollar amount on how much NPEs cost us, why do you think these open source patent alliances have not become far more popular?
I keep hoping they will become more popular. Personally, I think these numbers are conservative because you got to remember one of the things that a lot of these trolls are doing is trying they're actually going out and harvesting patents wholesale, and trying to go literally they're stealing technologies, stealing ideas. There's even some rumors running around that some of these trolls are starting to contemplate or go after people that have put their work into the Creative Commons world. My personal opinion is this is really, really bad. These people need to be punished. They need to be taken out back and beaten because this is really, really, really bad. These people are stealing other people's work, and it's totally wrong.
Curtis, over to you. Why is it that you think enterprises are so reluctant to actually fight these trolls? They're willing to pay them off rather than possibly lose something that could set a bad precedent. But, it seems to me that they should have made the calculus by now that it's no longer an option to not fight. You're muted.
It comes down to a question of cash. You mentioned doing the calculus, if they do the calculations and decide that it would be cheaper to settle for a certain amount than it would be to litigate, even if they win, then many times they're going to go ahead and write a check. This is one of those cases where I think we have to differentiate between two kinds of organizations that fall under the label of patent troll. One of them, as Brian has been talking about, are the companies that try to put in spurious patents that go ahead and try to file a patent on stuff for which prior art exists. And for those companies, I absolutely agree with my friend Brian. Those companies need to be dealt with extreme prejudice. A lot of people, though, put into the same category the companies that simply buy intellectual property as their stock in trade. And while we may have much less respect for a company that does this than for a company that actually builds things, I think that being able to treat intellectual property as a tangible asset is important to the entire system, because this really does offer incentive to inventors, to innovators who might not be able to put together the manufacturing capability to fully take advantage of their intellectual property. They can go ahead and develop something, invent it, and then sell it to another company, knowing that they'll benefit and something will actually get made. The question becomes, how do we prevent trolls while allowing the transference of intellectual property? And that's where it gets really sticky. So in terms of bad patents, things that try to capitalize on prior art, I absolutely agree. Let's take these companies out and figuratively shoot them in the head. For the others, I think we need to be really careful and not go too far and somehow provide an economic disincentive for innovation.
Right, right. Another part of the study is the fact that, the data shows that most of these NPEs, these non-practicing entities, go after the small to medium companies. They're not going after the big companies because they know that maybe they'll agree, they'll figure out that it's worth fighting. So 90% of these lawsuits are against the little guy, which it just gets more and more disgusting as we go on. Chibert, I want to give you the last word here. Curtis has talked about a couple of potential solutions, reformulating the IP system, looking at the way that we transfer IP from one company to the other. I'm a big fan of these open patent agreements where you agree not to sue one another. What else could we possibly do to fight against NPEs? Is there something that either the academic or the enterprise community can do to make it less attractive to go after these patent troll lawsuits?
I don't have a good solution. I do have a few suggestions that our friends in the patent office really need to have collaboration, shall we say, with subject matter experts in the fields. They're trying to do this. They're trying to basically say you own this technology, but yet they're not doing it as well as they possibly could. Let's put it that way. And academia has had a long-standing way of doing peer review. Personally, I think patents need to have peer review. It needs to have some neutral third parties that review those patents. It might slow it down, but the patent process is glacial in speed anyway. Let's do it right. Let's actually go and say your patent is pending, peer review. Let's go and say peer review before your patent is awarded.
I can't believe that you said you didn't have any real ideas. That is actually an excellent idea. That's taking academia and applying it to the USPTO system. And yeah, we don't do enough research. And the USPTO has been very honest about this. They're saying anyone who would know enough about this to do a thorough review of the patent, especially as it relates to intellectual property in the IT world, well, they're not working for us. They're working for the patent trolls. They're going to make far more money. So the ability to have experts who can sit down with a patent application and say, yeah, no, this has existed, or this doesn't make sense, this does not pass the obviousness test, that's actually a fantastic start. Let's move on to the next story I like to call Trollsville. That's Rackspace fighting back against yet another patent troll. Fresh off their victory against Unilock, Rackspace, who, by the way, was trying to patent math, Rackspace is now going after Parallel Iron and IPNav. These are so-called patent assertion entities, companies that do nothing but sue based on IP that they've acquired or licensed. Again, they're NPEs, non-practicing entities. The patent that they're being sued over, Rackspace, covers the Hadoop distributed file system. Now, here's the fun thing. Maybe Jason can bring up these the graphic. The first one is the actual complaint that involves three specific patents that they're bringing up, and that is 7197662, 7543177, and 7958388. Now, here's the wonderful thing, if Jason will move over to the Google documents. If you look at the abstracts that they submitted for each of these patents, they're exactly the same. Literally, they are copy and pasted. Not only that, but if you look deeper into the document, they're all vague. They're really, really vague. They don't really say what they've patented, just that they've patented some sort of system of storing data on more than one device and then error correcting. Now, and anyone who's done IT or been in the computer field knows that this sort of technology has been around since we've had error correcting, since the days of modems. So the fact that they were granted these patents, that's one thing. The fact that they were granted three patents that are essentially the same is another thing. What makes it even more ridiculous is the way that they've used these patents offensively. Let's talk a little bit about the case. So the lawsuit began in 2012 when IPNav, on Parallel Iron's behalf, struck a deal with Rackspace for each side to give the other side 30 days before suing. In other words, they said to Rackspace, we're going to sue you. We're not going to tell you what we're going to sue you for unless you agree not to sue us without giving us all your data for 30 days. They went ahead and violated their own agreement and sued Rackspace, saying that Rackspace's use of Hadoop, that's that big data back end, violated three of their patents, but they never really specified exactly how they violated it. This is so much of a patent troll lawsuit. It's just fits the stereotype. But Cheebert, the question I have for you is, if they are able to affirm this patent, let's say Rackspace loses, let's say that IPNav gets the ability to own putting data across multiple servers, across multiple storage devices, and then comparing those data sets to make sure there's no errors. What does that do for big data? Because that's all big data is.
Okay, first and foremost, this is such a load of horse hockey, it's not even funny. And to answer that question, this has been around since 1961, I believe February, when Dr. Wesley Peterson first published an academic paper on the use of mathematical representations for the purpose of error correction. So already we've got some prior art going here. And this is where, we've got some people that are clearly and truly needs to have the world. The world needs to go get up and punish these people. you know, I'm ready to spit. This is really and truly people cheating, people stealing. Um, they're stealing candies from kids. You know, this is not the intent of patent law. The patent law is for someone to be able to get protection for something truly unique, and these clowns are abusing it, and they need to be punished. I think the community needs to go and find a way to really and truly punish people like this.
All right. Uh, Curtis, I think we're beating a dead troll, so I want to move on. But I do want to give you a chance to speak up for the enterprise side here. We've heard from Chibert, and he's from academia, so of course he's upset because he knows the history of these sorts of techniques, of this technology. But when you start looking at the enterprise, when you have an enterprise manager who's presented with, let's say, a complaint from a company like IPNav, and the complaint says, well, we're probably going to come after you, but we want all your information first before we do that. What's going to be the typical reply?
Well, I think the typical reply has two parts. One of them is you place a call to your company attorney, and the other is that you place a call to your service provider going, what are you going to do about this? Now, in the case of those companies that have Rackspace as a partner, they're in very good shape. And I really kind of like the idea that Rackspace is providing what looks to be a competitive advantage by supporting their customers against this kind of troll behavior. An attorney who is worth his or her salt in the IP realm will look at this complaint and say, this will not stand up. But having Rackspace's dollars behind it make it a much more compelling story. This is the sort of thing where I think many of us who've been in the business know the first time you're served with a legal notice, it's kind of scary. After that, you know the routine, you refer it to your legal team and their partners, and you keep going with your business. And I think most enterprises would do that.
Curtis, I think you just came up with the show title, This Will Not Stand, all periods. Now, I do want to come back to this because we're going to speak briefly about exactly what Hadoop does. We're going to give you a visual representation of how we use that technology in order to do big data analysis. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the last sponsor on today's This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Rackspace. We just talked about Rackspace. We talked about how wonderful they are for standing up to the trolls. And you know what? That's why I'm so happy that they are a supporter of This Week in Enterprise Tech. They're a company that we can actually believe in. Everyone talks about cloud computing, but Rackspace knows that not all cloud computing providers are the same. Some use proprietary technology, which makes it expensive and complicated to move your data if you want to leave. What you want is an open cloud solution built on open standards. Now, Rackspace is the open cloud company that co-founded OpenStack and now runs the world's largest open cloud. Open cloud means that you're not locked into a single provider. You have the freedom to move your apps, your code base, and your websites between multiple OpenStack-based clouds, public or private, on-premise or hosted. Big business or small, public or private services or data, Rackspace is perfect for the Twilight crowd because they get the enterprise. They understand what we need and what we don't. If you're listening to me now, I want you to help me welcome Rackspace to the Twilight Riot. I want to show them that we support them, that we get them like they get us. So please, send a tweet to Rackspace thanking them for being part of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Tell them the Twilight Riot is ready for the rack. Go ahead and go to twitter.com/Rackspace and let them know that they're loved. Now, here's the offer. Build what you want, where you want, and how you want. All backed by Rackspace, world-renowned fanatical support. Try it today. Download the Open Cloud at rackspace.com/open. That's rackspace.com/open. And we thank Rackspace for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get back to it. We're talking about Hadoop. Now, Brian Chi had a video about 5 years ago that did a really good job of explaining how Hadoop, this big data framework, gets used by, academia.
Hi, I'm Brian Chi. I'm with the University of Hawaii School of Ocean, Earth Sciences and Technology. Splunk is kind of a unique product. It allows us to take a lot of time series data. Now, if anyone's ever played with sonar or ocean observing, it's all time series. And one of our big challenges has been, how the heck do we organize and how the heck do we mine this rich source of data? We're actually, every time we sail out on one of our research vessels, we tow behind us a side scan sonar. It's like a torpedo, and we put it on a long tail and trail it behind the ship. We call it mowing the lawn, because it's actually a strip about 30 kilometers wide, depending on the depth, and we map the sea floor. Well, getting to all this data has been a continuous challenge for us, and we're always looking for new ways of organizing and mining that data. Splunk is one of the solutions that we're taking a good hard look at because of its value in being able to organize it in form of a timeline and line up events from multiple data locations. So we might have an undersea microphone. In this case, I have one that's 100 kilometers north of the Hawaiian island chain and 5 kilometers deep. We've got, in the summer, whales. We've got krill clicking in the background. We've even heard a Chinese diesel electric sub go by. There's all these wonderful events that are all time series data, but how do you correlate them together? How do you organize it? In this case, we're taking a very hard look at Splunk, and who knows, maybe one of these days you'll be able to go to our website, issue a command, and ask for all the data from a certain spot in the ocean organized by Splunk.
Now, Chibert, we kind of like this. I mean, I understand big data. I understand what it does. I understand what Hadoop does. But let's bring it down. I mean, let's really explain what this tool, what this technology is allowing you to do. So you've got this network that is just collecting tons of data, tons of sonar data, acoustic data from all over the ocean. How does that get put into Hadoop?
Well, let's be honest. We actually have not implemented Hadoop or Splunk yet. Our biggest problem is the bump in the economy, shall we say, has really dramatically cut down on our research dollars. So being able to create a system that's all-encompassing and being able to organize all this data together hasn't happened yet. However, the architecture that we've got set up is no researcher wants to give up their data. And the proposed architecture is that we have each research group feeding it into a system like Hadoop, and then have a campus-wide or a college-wide system that would then take those indexes and index the cross-correlation relationships. So someday, we hope, if we ever have the money to pull this off, we want to be able to go and say at such and such a time period. Say, for instance, our infrasound lab runs a test where they do some ultra low frequency sound generators just off the Kona coast. We want to be able to go and say, during that test, let's go and see what happened to the whales, say off Oahu, what happened on the sonars in Alaska, what happened in the temperature monitoring systems, say off Nova Scotia. We want to be able to go and line up all this data. Now, what Hadoop and Splunk give us the ability to do is to have these external databases and correlate them all together. So what we do is we go and say, at such and such a time, what happened? Obviously, we use it at Interop to do the same thing with syslog. So a corporate customer would say, get a trouble ticket. The CEO had a really bad VoIP call, say at 10 p.m. last night. Now, under normal circumstances, you would say, okay, we're just going to have to wait for it. But if we have the ability to line it up, we can go back in time and say at 10 p.m. last night, what other things happened, and be able to pull all those syslog entries together so we can say, oh, someone made a mistake. They did a very major firmware upgrade right at that time, but sorry, Mr. CEO, we didn't switch you over to the backup system because it was 10 p.m. We didn't think you were there. No one told us you had that important call. We're really sorry. But at least you've given them a firm answer. So being able to go back in time and lining up the events is a really, really powerful tool, be it undersea research or be it syslogs for the enterprise.
Curtis, let me throw this over to you because so we've heard from Chibert how he would use this in academia, how he would use it in a network environment. But Hadoop goes far beyond that. I mean, it's pretty much synonymous with big data. If you're going to be dealing with big data, you're probably programming with Hadoop. We've seen enterprises try to use big data sets within Hadoop to do things like, for example, correlate days and times and buying habits with when customers are ready to actually make their purchase. What do you think is, well, what is enterprises' view of big data? What is enterprises' view of Hadoop? Do they really understand what it does, or is it just sort of a magic black box that they throw data into and they pull correlations out of?
Well, this is one of those cases where I spent last week talking to a lot of large storage engineers, and big data, of course, was one of their things. It's important to note that big data has nothing to do with the volume of data. Big data is a technique. Big data is talking about correlating lots of different bits of data, lots of different data sources in order to reach conclusions that you can't reach by looking at one or two of these by themselves. Now, as it turns out, this often does involve large volumes of data, and Hadoop is independent of that. The idea of Hadoop is that it provides a really good way of managing a single logical data space that extends across all of these physical volumes and locations. That's the magic of Hadoop. Now, the size of data is growing independently. It's fascinating. I listen to people talking about multiple petabyte storage farms that were nothing more than JBOD in a room, just a bunch of disks sitting in racks. You don't have to get sophisticated to be big. You don't have to be big to be sophisticated. But when you put the two together, you're able to do a lot. Now, you asked how much the enterprise understands. Once you get outside of the data architects, the answer is not much. There's an awful lot of magical thinking going on. We had a laugh around the conference table at one of the meals where I said, it's amazing how many people are making purchasing decisions based on having one guy in the room run around going, Hadoop, 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 Hadoop. And about all they really know is that there's a really cute cartoon elephant, and the marketing department says they need better analytics. How did they make this happen? Well, the only answer they know is Hadoop, 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 Hadoop. Once we get past that, then I think we're going to start to see many more intelligent decisions being made. But I'm guessing we're a solid 12 to 18 months away from that level of understanding reaching much higher in the corporate hierarchy.
Cheever, what do you think about this? Sly Ferret, or was it, no, Titus in the chat room has said, well, my data is bigger than your data. And it almost seems as if enterprise, that's what it's becoming. It's, well, how many disparate data sets are you using? How many different databases are you incorporating into your correlation engine? But we know it's more than that, right? Because Hadoop, big data, these big data services and algorithms can sort of weed out bad data, but if you give it too much bad data, you get bad correlations, yes?
Oh, yeah. No matter how big your data set is, no matter what your data set is, if you ask bad questions or if you don't organize it well, it's just going to be worthless. And no, I'm sorry. Nobody has bigger data sets than academia. I'm really and truly sorry. When we actually tried to take a good hard look and say, what's it going to take to store all the data from all our research labs? My dean just about had a coronary. When you start describing data sets in the thousands of petabytes, that's when you start really getting frightened and go, can we compress and encode this a little?
Right. Actually, before we go on, Curtis, could I get you to explain and maybe demonstrate again what happens around the executive table with Hadoop?
Well, the key is having someone in the room who can sit there and go, Hadoop, 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 Hadoop.
Okay, thank you. That's all we need to appreciate. I want to go back to you, Hubert. Actually, I want to extend on that. Let's take it one step further down, because I think we understand the kind of correlations that we're trying to make. But could you give me at least a sample, let's say, of the sonar project that will hopefully go off? What would be the data sets that you would be collecting and trying to correlate? What would be the actual, what would they look like? What do they describe? What are the things that you're trying to bring together? I mean, we get it abstractly, but I want to make it real.
Okay, first and foremost, Hadoop, 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 Hadoop. Oh, sorry.
It's spreading.
Yeah. So anyway, no, little things like if you can correlate, say, just straight hydrophones, say 24 kilohertz hydrophones. Do you know how many there are in the Pacific? And gee, if we can more accurately correlate the 24 kilohertz hydrophones, say, just in the Western Pacific, suddenly the Navy has some really interesting tools on tracking where things are, or the Coast Guard, more importantly, has a really interesting way of finding where a ship is sinking, because gee, the Navy's taught us that the sounds of a ship breaking up or the sounds of a ship sinking is a very unique sound. Why can't we apply some supercomputing to that to do signal analysis, searching through the databases and find out whether or not we can triangulate that signal across multiple hydrophones? Small example, but gee, interesting. Now, the danger is we got some serious big brother issues going on here, because now all of a sudden you can tell when, say, a Japanese fishing trawler is poaching in someone's waters, or a factory ship is trying to go to one of these protected areas and harvesting giant clams. Is that a good use? Maybe. Is it something we should do? I don't know. That might be a topic for the World Court. But when you have access and able to correlate a lot of this data together, you can start asking some really interesting questions. The only thing I caution is, should you be asking these questions?
Well, you've done it again. You've used up another hour listening to the best dang enterprise news show on the planet. I want to thank my panel very much for coming back on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you guys. Hubert, let's start with you. What's going on other than Interop Hot Stage? Or maybe talk about Interop Hot Stage. Where can we find you? Where will your work be coming out? What are you going to be doing?
Well, I am having all kinds of fun. I'm not even sure if I'm on. The system's doing some strange things here. We are in Brisbane. The end result is going to be in Las Vegas the first week of May, and you'll be able to come on over, come and visit us, knock on the fishbowl at the knock and say hi. We'll be more than happy to talk to you and tell you about some of the technologies going on. The InteropNet is a unique playpen. We get some of the very best technology, put it together. We actually have competitors working side by side. It is one of the unique venues where competitors work together for the benefit of the internet and internet technology. We have had competitors actually helping to debug each other's software. Nowhere else does this type of thing happen. It is a unique venue. Come on down, and we'll be happy to talk about the show, talk about the technology for the show. And I am going to go out and say, gee, punish the trolls. Thank you very much.
Well, we know that Hubert will be spending the next couple of weeks in Uber Geek Summer Camp. What about you, Curtis? Are you going to make it over to Interop?
I'm absolutely planning to be at Interop. As a matter of fact, Glenn has said that I can have a spot in the NOC, so I'll be reporting from inside the NOC at Interop. Looking forward to that. Before that happens, though, next week I'm going to go off and learn a lot about the Adobe Creative Cloud. And between now and Interop, I'm going to be trying to sort through all of the stuff that I've gotten in the last two conferences I've attended. Lots of radio stuff happening, lots of articles happening at Enterprise Efficiency. We'd love to have the voice of the Twiet crew over at Enterprise Efficiency as well. They add a lot here. We'd love to see them adding just as much over there.
Indeed, indeed. If you want to know what's going on and the executive mind of the enterprise, you got to stop by Enterprise Efficiency. Of course, I want to thank you, everyone who watches, the members of the loyal Twiet Riot. You make this show possible. And you know what? We try to get this show out to you in as many ways as we possibly can. If you go to our page at twit.tv/Twiet, you will find all the different ways you can have all of the Twiet goodness dropped into your device of choice each and every single week automatically. That's right. If you want it on your iPhone? Yeah. iPad? Of course. Your Android device, tablet, or phone, you pick. Even if you want to drop it on a zombie Zune, you can get all the Twiet goodness in your device automatically. That's right. That's the kind of love that we've got for you. Also, did you know that we do this show live? That's right. Every Monday at noon Pacific time, we get together with the Twiet crew, either remote or in the Brick House, and we bring you the best enterprise news that we possibly can. You can reach us at live.twit.tv, and while you're there, why not drop into the chat room? You'll be able to talk to some of the funniest trolls, some of the brightest engineers, and experience some of this temporary community that is the grand Twit experiment. Also, I want you to drop by our Twiet YouTube page. That's youtube.com/Twiet. Subscribe, because Cheebert and I will be together. That's right, physically in the same space when we go to Interop Hot Stage. And we want to have our hangout. We haven't had it yet. And, well, we're going to use that to announce where it's going to be and what you need to do to be part of it. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. If you subscribe, you'll be able to find out what's going on in each new episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. And you'll be able to keep tabs on me in between shows. Finally, I want to thank Cyberdog in the chat room. He's the guy who helps us put all of our thoughts into show notes, and to our crew back at the Twit Brick House. That starts with Jason, our fantastic TD, who has to deal with things like dropping out Skype accounts. And, oh, by the way, who runs All About Android. Jason, for those enterprise people who may not know what Android is, does Twit have a show dedicated to that operating system?
We might, and it might be called All About Android. Every Tuesday night at 5 p.m. Pacific. You can catch it there. Or, subscribe to it, twit.tv/AAA. Thank you, sir.
Gosh, I'm such a subtle plugger. What about that? Also, I want to thank our producer, Carson, who is currently in Kauai, but will be back to join the Twiet Riot, and everyone back at the Brick House who makes this show possible. I'm Father Robert Baldassare, and remember, if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep Twiet.